60 kilometers northeast of Berlin, hidden deep within one of Germany's largest forests, lies a place that does not appear on any tourist map. There are no signs pointing to it, no plaques, no visitor center. If you walk through the Schorfheide forest today, you might pass within meters of it and never know what once stood there. Yet this forgotten site has drawn treasure hunters, historians, and extremists for decades, each searching for something different among the trees and undergrowth. This was Carinhall, the private country estate of Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring, once the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany. At its height, it was one of the most extravagant private residences in Europe, a sprawling palace that hosted kings, dictators, and celebrities. Its halls contained one of the largest art collections ever assembled, worth billions of dollars by today's standards. Foreign dignitaries marveled at its opulence. Hitler himself attended ceremonies in its grand rooms. Then, in the final days of World War II, Carinhall vanished. What happened to this monument to Nazi excess? Where did the thousands of stolen artworks go? And why, more than 80 years later, are people still digging in the forest hoping to find what remains? The answers involve buried treasures, Cold War secrets, DNA mysteries, and a landscape that refuses to let the past stay buried. To understand what Carinhall became, you first need to understand what it was. The story begins in 1933, shortly after the Nazis seized power in Germany. Hermann Göring, newly appointed as Prussian Prime Minister and soon to become commander of the Luftwaffe, acquired a tract of land in the Schorfheide forest. The Schorfheide was one of the largest continuous woodlands in Germany, a wild expanse of lakes, bogs, and ancient trees that had served as a hunting ground for Prussian royalty for centuries. Goring, a World War I flying ace with aristocratic pretensions, saw himself as heir to that tradition. He commissioned the architect Werner March, the same man who would design the Berlin Olympic Stadium, to build a Swedish-style hunting lodge on a promontory between two lakes, the Grossdölner Sea and the Wücker Sea. The lodge was named Carinhall, in honor of Goring's first wife, Carin von Kantzow, a Swedish baroness who had died of heart failure in 1931. Goring had been devastated by her death. His devotion to her memory bordered on obsession. In 1934, Goring arranged to have Carin's remains exhumed from her grave in Sweden and transported to Germany with full ceremonial honors. Adolf Hitler himself attended the elaborate funeral procession. A granite mausoleum was constructed on the Carinhall grounds, where Carin's body was interred in a tomb that Göring intended to share with her one day. The estate became not just a home, but a shrine. What began as a modest timber hunting lodge soon grew into something far grander. By 1937, Carinhall had undergone its first major expansion, transforming from a rustic cabin into a sprawling complex with two wings, a main building, and a formal courtyard. Hitler, recognizing the estate's potential for hosting foreign dignitaries, approved government funding to turn Carinhall into an official state residence. The guest book at Carinhall read like a WHO's who's who of pre-war diplomacy and celebrity. Former American President Herbert Hoover visited. So did the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, aviator Charles Lindbergh, Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, Count Ciano, British Foreign Minister Lord Halifax, and the kings of Bulgaria, Romania, and Yugoslavia. Aircraft designers Willy Messerschmitt and Ernst Heinkel came to discuss the future of German aviation. When the Japanese Foreign Minister Matsuoka visited in 1941, he reportedly remarked that Carinhall felt more like a museum than a home. He was not wrong. By 1940, the estate had expanded again to accommodate one of the largest private art collections in Europe. At the center of the complex was the Grand Gallery, a hall measuring 34 meters in length where Goring displayed his most prized acquisitions. The collection eventually numbered 1,375 paintings, 250 sculptures, and 168 tapestries. Works by Botticelli, Dürer, Cranach, Velázquez, Monet, Renoir, and Van Gogh hung on the walls. In the dining room alone, 2 Renoirs were prominently displayed. Conservative estimates suggest Goring was acquiring at least 3 paintings per week at the height of the war. The 1945 New York Times estimated the collection's value at $200 million, equivalent to nearly $3 billion today. The problem, of course, was how Goring had acquired these treasures. From 1937 onward, he relied on a network of art dealers, agents, and outright looters to feed his obsession. His primary agent, Walter Andreas Hofer, systematically combed occupied territories for new acquisitions. The Parisian museum Jeu de Paume became a central clearinghouse for art seized from French Jewish families. Goring personally visited the museum at least 20 times between 1941 and 1944, selecting pieces that caught his eye. Each time he found something he wanted, it was noted in a handwritten catalogue and shipped to Carinhall. Much of the collection had been stolen from Jewish families who were either forced to sell at a fraction of the true value, had fled for their lives, or had been deported to concentration camps. The Goudsticker collection alone, seized from a Dutch Jewish art dealer who died fleeing the Nazi invasion, included over 1,100 paintings that Goring purchased for about 1/6 of their actual worth. Beyond the art, Carinhall was a monument to Goring's personal vanity and eccentric tastes. The estate featured an indoor swimming pool, a cinema, a gymnasium, and extensive bathhouses by the lake. Goring had a model railway in the attic that was reportedly the largest in the world, covering 400 square meters. He kept lion cubs as pets, walking them through the halls until they grew too large, at which point they were sent to the Berlin Zoo and replaced with new cubs. When his only daughter Edda was born in 1938, the celebrations were national news. Hitler himself served as her godfather at a baptism ceremony held at Carinhall that was covered by Life magazine. The Luftwaffe built Edda a miniature palace in the orchard, a 50-meter structure complete with a small theatre, known as the Edda Schlossen. Members of the Nazi elite called her the Little Princess. Goring even had plans for the future. He envisioned transforming Carinhall into a museum after the war, one that would showcase his collection and be ready just in time for his 60th birthday in 1953. As late as January 1945, with Allied forces closing in from both east and west, Goring was still being shown architectural drawings for the proposed expansion. In his mind, Carinhall would stand forever, but history had other plans. The world outside Carinhall's gates was collapsing. The 1,000-year empire that Hitler had promised was falling apart after just 12 years. And Hermann Göring, once the most celebrated figure in the Nazi regime after Hitler himself, had fallen from favor. His Luftwaffe had failed at every critical juncture. By early 1945, the Reich was crumbling. Soviet forces had pushed through Poland and were advancing into Germany from the east. American and British armies were closing in from the west. Goring's Luftwaffe had failed to win the Battle of Britain, and it had failed to stop the Allied bombing campaign that was reducing German cities to rubble. By 1945, Goring spent most of his time at Carinhall, increasingly isolated, addicted to morphine, and surrounded by his treasures as the world he had helped build burned around him. But Goring was not prepared to let his collection fall into enemy hands. In 1943, anticipating Allied bombing, he had already begun moving portions of his art to a converted salt mine at Altaussee in Austria, deep in the mountains where no bomb could reach. By January 1945, special trains were loading the remaining artworks at Carinhall and transporting them south toward Berchtesgaden in Bavaria, near Hitler's mountain retreat. On April 20th, 1945, Göring left Carinhall for the last time. The occasion was Hitler's 56th birthday, and Göring travelled to Berlin to pay his respects in the Führer bunker beneath the ruined capital. He knew he would never return to his estate. The Soviet Red Army was less than 50 kilometers away. Before departing, Göring gave orders to a small unit of Luftwaffe soldiers under the command of Captain Frankenberg. Their instructions were specific. They were to remain at Carinhall and wait. As soon as the Soviets came into sight, they were to destroy the estate completely. Nothing was to remain for the enemy to capture or occupy. The soldiers stayed behind, watching the forest, waiting for the end. 8 days passed. On April the 28th, Soviet troops reached the nearby town of Gross Schönebeck and began advancing toward the lakes. Captain Frankenberg gave the order. The demolition squad had prepared more than 80 aircraft bombs distributed throughout the complex. They detonated them systematically, building by building. The Grand Gallery with its 34-meter hall, the guest wings where kings had slept, The cinema, the gymnasium, the bathhouses, the Ederschlossen where the little princess had played. One explosion after another echoed across the lakes, as the estate that had taken 12 years to build was reduced to rubble in a matter of hours. When the smoke cleared, Carinhall was gone. Only the monumental entrance gates, a few foundation structures, and scattered decorative stones survived the destruction. The mausoleum containing Hermann Göring's remains was left largely intact, standing alone among the debris. But what would happen to even these remnants was a story that would unfold over the next 8 decades. When the dust settled over Carinhall, the site found itself in the Soviet occupation zone, which would soon become the German Democratic Republic. For the residents of the surrounding villages, the ruins represented an opportunity. In the immediate post-war years, locals descended on what remained of the estate, salvaging anything useful. Iron fittings, copper pipes, decorative metalwork, anything that could be pried loose and carried off, found new homes behind closed doors. Furniture, chandeliers, marble, and building materials were carted away and incorporated into homes throughout the region. Some of this material remains there to this day, hidden in farmhouses and village homes never spoken of openly. Much of what could be moved was stripped from the site by 1953, when official salvage operations finally ended. What could not be moved was systematically demolished. In the early 1950s, East German authorities ordered the remaining ruins to be leveled. The Schorfheide forest itself was designated a restricted zone, a private hunting ground for the communist leadership. The area around Carinhall was forbidden to ordinary citizens. State security forces patrolled the region. Erich Honecker would later use the nearby Jagdschloss Hubertusstock as his personal retreat. For 45 years, Carinhall existed as a kind of non-place, accessible only to party officials. The forest reclaimed what the demolition crews had left behind. Trees grew through the rubble. The estate vanished beneath the undergrowth. While Carinhall was being erased from the landscape, the fate of Goring's art collection was playing out hundreds of kilometers to the south. The treasures that Goring had evacuated became the target of one of the largest art recovery operations in history. Allied forces learned of the Nazi art caches from a German officer who offered to reveal locations in exchange for safe passage for his family. The Altaussee mine was one of the largest repositories of looted art anywhere in the world. Its tunnels, carved from rock salt over centuries, maintained a constant temperature of about 8 degrees Celsius and humidity of around 65%, perfect conditions for preserving paintings. By the end of the war, the mine housed over 6,500 paintings, including masterpieces by Vermeer, Rembrandt, and Rubens. Michelangelo's Madonna and Child sculpture, stolen from the Church of Our Lady in Bruges, was there. So was the Ghent altarpiece, one of the most important works of early Flemish painting. As the Allies closed in, Gauleiter August Eigruber ordered 8 bombs, each weighing 500 kilograms, to be transported into the mine tunnels. His plan was to destroy everything rather than let it fall into enemy hands. The crates were labeled "Caution," "Marble," "Do not drop" to disguise their contents. But local miners sabotaged the operation. Many of them had worked in those tunnels their entire lives. Their families had mined the salt for generations. They understood what was at stake. In secret, they began to undermine Eigruber's plan. On the night of May 3rd to 4th, 1945, working through the darkness, they secretly removed the bombs and blew up the mine entrances, sealing the art inside, but safe from destruction. When the Gauleiter learned that explosions had occurred, he believed his orders had been carried out. He did not realize that the miners had outsmarted him. When American troops reached Altaussee on May 8, 1945, they found the art intact. Officers from the Monuments, Fine Arts and Archives program began the painstaking work of cataloguing the collection. By July 1945, they had removed 6,577 paintings, 230 drawings and watercolors, 954 prints, and 137 sculptures from the mine. It took 80 trucks to transport the materials to the Munich Central Collecting Point. Goring's personal collection, intercepted by American forces in Bavaria, entered a long process of restitution. After Goring's suicide in his Nuremberg cell on October 15, 1946, the German government assumed control of remaining items in 1949. One of the strangest discoveries came from the collection itself. Among Goring's treasures was a painting he believed to be a genuine Vermeer, Christ with the Adulteress. He had traded 137 other looted paintings to obtain it. After the war, it was revealed to be a brilliant forgery by a Dutch painter named Han van Meegeren. The master looter had himself been swindled. For 4 decades, Carinhall remained hidden behind the Iron Curtain, inaccessible to all but the most privileged members of the East German elite. The site was not discussed in official histories. It did not appear on maps available to the public. An entire generation grew up in East Germany without knowing what lay in the restricted forests of the Schorfheide. The communist government had no interest in preserving a monument to fascist excess, and even less interest in creating a potential pilgrimage site for those who might still venerate the old regime. That changed in 1990. When the Berlin Wall fell, the Schorfheide was incorporated into a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. For the first time since 1945, ordinary citizens could visit where Carinhall had stood. What they found was a landscape haunted by absence. The entrance gates still stood, Goring's insignia of crossed marshal's batons still visible on the weathered pillars. Beyond them, the forest had reclaimed almost everything. Only scattered piles of rubble, fragments of brick and mortar, and the occasional decorative stone marked where the grand halls had once stood. Near the lake, an indentation in the ground showed where the mausoleum had been. Without historical photographs for reference, it was nearly impossible to orient oneself on the site. If the buildings were gone, perhaps not everything had been taken. The East German authorities had known for years that valuable objects might still be hidden at Carinhall, but political sensitivities had prevented serious excavation. In July 1990, just months before formal German reunification, the Ministry of the Interior finally acted and sent divers into the Großdölner Sea, the lake beside the estate. Rumours had circulated for decades that what Goring could not take with him, he had ordered dumped into the water. The divers descended into the murky depths, searching the lake bottom for traces of the vanished palace. They found them. 5 bronze statues were recovered from the lake, including a copy of the Venus Medici that had once stood in the ceremonial hall. The statues showed a greenish tinge from their decades underwater, but they were intact. They were transferred to the Jagdschloss Schorfheide Museum in nearby Gross Schönebeck, where they remain on display today. The official recovery from the lake was only the beginning. Word spread quickly that artifacts from Carinhall were still waiting to be found. In 1999, a book titled Göring's Reich, Selbstinszenierungen in Carinhall, reignited public interest in the site. Written by historians Volker Knopf and Stefan Martens, it provided the first comprehensive account of the estate's history and sparked a wave of treasure hunting that continues to this day. Metal detectorists and amateur archaeologists descended on the forest, hoping to find remnants of Göring's splendor buried in the soil. Many of them found something. Silver napkin rings, spoons, medals, vases, buttons, and fragments of decorative objects turned up in the undergrowth. Each find seemed to confirm that more treasures lay waiting. But the real breakthrough came from a Berlin man named Klaus Funke. Searching through the forest with a metal detector, Funke discovered something the official excavators had missed: the entrance to one of Carinhall's underground bunkers. The bunkers had been built during the war as air raid shelters and command centers. They had survived the demolition largely intact, buried beneath the debris. Over 18 months, Funke sifted through the rubble inside the collapsed structures. What he found astonished archaeologists. He recovered 300 kilograms of Chinese, Roman, and Greek pottery shards, along with statues and golden dresser fittings. Many of the pieces had been inside the bunkers when the buildings above were destroyed, shattered by the force of the explosions but preserved beneath the rubble. Funke turned his finds over to the Museum für Vor- und Frühe Geschichte in Berlin. More than 4,000 vase fragments were eventually transferred to Berlin's Antikensammlung from excavations conducted at the site throughout the 1990s. Many of these had belonged to ancient Greek and Roman vessels that Göring had acquired from dealers in Italy and Greece. Their full provenance remains unclear. The treasure hunting continued into the 21st century. In February 2020, treasure hunters discovered a large marble column buried 2 meters deep in the forest. The community of Schorfheide conducted an official excavation in December of that year. The column, Measuring 3.25 meters long and crafted from red marble, likely from Verona in Italy, had probably been part of the ornate dining room where those two Renoirs had hung. When the bombs detonated in 1945, it collapsed into the cellar beneath and was buried by debris. Experts believe the original column was around 5 meters long. After excavation, the fragment was moved to the Jagdschloss Schorfheide Museum, joining the bronze statues recovered from the lake. Not everyone who visited Carinhall came looking for pottery shards and marble fragments. Almost immediately after reunification, the site began attracting a different kind of visitor. Neo-Nazis saw in the ruins a shrine to one of Hitler's most powerful lieutenants, a place where they could pay homage away from public scrutiny. They gathered at the site on significant dates, including Hitler's birthday on April the 20th, to pay homage. They left flowers and tokens. They painted symbols on the stones. For them, the absence of official commemoration was itself a statement. Local authorities initially tried to manage the problem by providing historical context. Stone markers were placed on the grounds, but these only made it easier for extremists to find and venerate the site. By the late 1990s, the Brandenburg state government took drastic action. Officials ordered remaining structures associated with Hermann Göring's mausoleum demolished and removed all markers. Today, no official signage directs visitors to the site. The bunker was converted into a Bat sanctuary. The ongoing problem of neo-Nazi activity has made authorities reluctant to develop the site for educational tourism, despite its undeniable historical significance. It is a peculiar form of historical erasure, the deliberate unmarking of a place to prevent its veneration. Carinhall cannot be turned into a museum or memorial without risking its transformation into a shrine. So it remains unmarked, known but not acknowledged, a ghost in the forest. Among the strangest post-war mysteries connected to Carinhall is the fate of the woman for whom it was named. When Hermann Göring fled south in April 1945, he left behind not only his estate but also the remains of Carin, the wife whose memory he had honoured with obsessive devotion. The mausoleum survived the demolition of the main buildings relatively intact, but in the chaos that followed the Soviet occupation, local salvaging and the communist-era demolitions, what happened to Carin's body became unclear. In 1951, skeletal remains found near the site were believed to belong to Carin Goring. Swedish journalist Björn von Tander described those remains as no more than a human torso. They were cremated and reburied in the Fock family tomb in Stockholm. Case closed, it seemed. Then, in 1991, treasure hunters discovered a zinc coffin buried near the destroyed mausoleum. Inside were skeletal remains. If Carin's body had been found, cremated and reburied in 1951, whose remains were in this coffin? The coffin was sent to Uppsala University for detailed scientific examination. Researchers conducted both anthropological and DNA analysis. The anthropological examination confirmed the remains belonged to an adult woman. The bones showed signs consistent with someone of Carin's age and health history when she died. DNA testing compared the bones with a sample from Carin's son from her first marriage, Thomas von Kantzow, who was still alive. Results published in 2012 were conclusive. The mitochondrial DNA sequences were identical. The 1991 remains were indeed Carin Göring. Whoever had been cremated in 1951 was someone else entirely. The confirmed remains were finally reburied in Sweden, but whose ashes rest in the Fock family tomb remains unknown. Despite massive recovery efforts, not everything from Göring's collection was accounted for. The scale of the looting was so vast, and the chaos of the war's final months so complete, that hundreds of works simply vanished. The handwritten catalogue, kept in France's diplomatic archives since the war and published for the first time in 2015 in a book titled The Goring Catalogue, revealed 1,794 entries, 1,376 paintings, 250 sculptures, and 168 tapestries. Each entry noted the name of the work, the artist, a description, and its origin. Researchers have identified 300 to 400 works whose ultimate fate remains uncertain. Some may have been destroyed, others may have been looted from the ruins, still others may remain hidden in private collections. The case of Walter Andreas Hofer illustrates how those networks of wartime looting persisted long after 1945. Hofer, Goring's art agent, was sentenced in absentia to 10 years in prison by a military court for his role in the plunder. The sentence was never executed. He was able to continue his Munich art trade undisturbed until his death, dealing in works whose origins he knew better than anyone. Bruno Lohse, an SS officer who had served as a procurement agent for Goring at the Jeu de Paume in Paris, spent only a brief period in custody after the war. Released in 1950, he became part of a shadow network of former Nazis who continued dealing in artworks of dubious origin, selling pieces to museums and collectors who asked few questions. When Lohse died in 2007, dozens of paintings by Renoir, Monet, and Pissarro were found in his bank vault in Zurich and in his Munich home. The question of how many looted pieces pass through such networks and remain in circulation today has no definitive answer. In 2015, German authorities made the Goring collection database available online through the German Historical Museum. Restitution claims continue to this day as heirs of Jewish families looted during the Holocaust seek to recover what was taken from their ancestors more than 80 years ago. The destruction of Carinhall marked the end of an era for the Goring family. Emmy Göring was classified as a Belle Estate, or major offender, by a Munich denazification tribunal in 1948. She lost all remaining property rights and was barred from receiving pensions. She lived out her final years in modest circumstances in Munich, publishing her autobiography in 1967. She died on the 8th June 1973 at the age of 80. Edda, the little princess of Carinhall, christened with Hitler as her godfather, spent her adult life defending her father's memory. She studied law at the University of Munich, worked as a medical technical assistant, never married, and never had children. In the 1970s, she became associated with journalist Gerd Heidemann, who had purchased the Carin II, the yacht once owned by her father. Their relationship placed her in social circles where the past was discussed openly, gatherings that sometimes included former SS officers. In interviews during the 1990s and the 2000s, she insisted that her father had been kind and protective. When asked about his documented crimes, she would reply simply that she remembered a loving father. She spent her later years living quietly in Munich. When she died on 21st December 2018 at the age of 80, the New York Times highlighted her unwavering loyalty to her father's memory. Bettina Göring, Hermann's grandniece, took a radically different path. Born after the war and raised outside the immediate family structure, she grew up deeply aware of the burden the Goring name carried. Unlike Edda, she rejected the family narrative entirely. She moved to the United States and later settled in New Mexico, as far from Germany as she could get. In interviews, she spoke openly about the psychological weight of being related to one of the most notorious figures of the Third Reich. In the 2000s, Bettina attracted international attention when she revealed that both she and her brother had voluntarily undergone sterilization. Her reasoning, as she explained it, was to end the line and ensure that no future generation would inherit what she called the shadow of Goring. Her decision stood in stark contrast to Edda's lifelong loyalty. While Edda defended her father until her final years, Bettina confronted the past head-on, discussing shame, responsibility, and the cost of inherited history. Two descendants, two radically different responses to the same impossible legacy. Today, Carinhall lies within the Schorfheide Carin Biosphere Reserve, one of the largest protected areas in Germany. Covering nearly 130,000 hectares, the reserve was established in 1990 under the UNESCO Man and Biosphere Programme. It is a landscape of forests, lakes and marshes, home to beavers, otters, white-tailed eagles and 16 of Germany's 22 bat species. The contrast between the beauty of the landscape and its dark history is striking. The entrance gates remain standing, their pillars bearing Göring's insignia, weathered but still legible. Scattered debris, bricks, rebar and mortar fragments litter the ground beneath the trees. The foundations of some structures are still visible, overgrown with moss and lichen. The most accessible way to learn about Carinhall today is through the Jagdschloss Schorfheide Museum in Gross Schönebeck, about 10 kilometers south of the site. The museum features an exhibition exploring the political history of the forest from the Prussian monarchs through the Nazi era. A scale model of Carinhall shows what the estate looked like at its height. bronze statues recovered from the lake, the marble column excavated from the ruins, and other artifacts are on display. But the site itself remains unmarked. There is no plaque, no visitor centre, no guided tour. The German government has deliberately chosen not to develop Carinhall, wary of creating a destination for those who might venerate rather than learn from the past. The art that once filled its halls has scattered across museums and private collections around the world. Some pieces have been returned to families from whom they were stolen. Others remain lost. The ruins exist in a kind of limbo, present but unacknowledged, known but officially unnamed. Trees grow where lion cubs once played and kings once dined. The lakes that Goring loved to gaze upon reflect only sky and woodland. Beneath the soil, fragments of ancient pottery, scraps of marble, and pieces of a shattered regime lie waiting, occasionally surfacing when a treasure hunter's shovel breaks the earth or erosion exposes a forgotten foundation. The story of Carinhall after World War II is in many ways the story of how Germany has struggled to reckon with its past. The estate was destroyed to prevent the Soviets from capturing it, erased by the East Germans to avoid creating a shrine, and reclaimed by nature during decades of Cold War isolation. When the Iron Curtain finally fell, Carinhall became a magnet for treasure hunters, historians, and extremists alike, each seeking something different in the rubble. The ruins of Carinhall are not a monument. They are not meant to teach or commemorate or warn. They simply exist, hidden in plain sight, a reminder that history does not disappear just because we blow up the buildings, or bulldoze the rubble, or refuse to put up signs. The forest remembers, even when we try to forget. If you found this video insightful, watch what happened to Hermann Göring's family after World War II next. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more historic weirdos. Thanks for watching.